What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and we are continuing our look at the 2022 schedules for each team, also giving you a very early projected record. Ohio State is up next, and keep in mind this is not an official prediction. We're simply doing a projection based off of the schedule and based off of how good each team is expected to be, what the early perception is for each team heading into 2022. As you can see, Oregon, the big non-conference matchup for Ohio State last year, that was the game that Ohio State lost. You have to wonder, what if they had not played Oregon? What if this team had played 3 cupcakes in the non-conference? Their only loss would have come to Michigan. Would there have been a case for Ohio State to possibly make it into the college football playoff? Were they penalized for playing a big non-conference game? It depends on how you look at it. But yeah, they played Oregon in the non-conference, lost that game. Their other non-conference games were Tulsa and Akron, took care of business in those games. Ohio State, though, they improved so much as the season went on. They were a different team when they played Oregon than when they got to the month of November. Of course, did have a rough game against Michigan, a loss there at the end of the season. You look at the teams they played out of the West. They played Nebraska on the road, a Nebraska team that was obviously much better than their record. A Minnesota team that was actually pretty good. They played them on the road, and then they played Purdue. But they did not play Iowa, did not play Wisconsin. So overall, they had a pretty good conference schedule this past year, except the fact that they had to play Michigan on the road. That wound up costing them a shot at the Big Ten championship. So let's look now at the 2022 schedule. Of course, Notre Dame, the big non-conference game this year. Before we go game by game, let's look at who they play outside of the division, because, of course, they play every Big Ten East team. They'll play Notre Dame, just talked about that, Arkansas State, and Toledo. So you're playing obviously a really good team in Notre Dame, probably a top 10 team. Arkansas State and Toledo, those are a pretty good group of 5 teams. So if you're Ohio State, I think you like having these types of games. You're not playing an FCS team, or you're not playing a terrible group of 5 team. A team that's at least going to challenge you a little bit. Yeah, you're probably going to blow them out. You're probably going to be able to put the backups in the second half, but it's at least some decent competition. So they'll play those 2 teams. And then, what if they lose to Notre Dame? Could the same thing happen this year? Could Notre Dame cost them a spot in the college football playoff? That'll be very interesting. I think that might be the best non-conference game of the season in 2022. Really looking forward to that one. And then who do they play out of the West? They'll play Wisconsin and Iowa, and then they'll play Northwestern. So a tougher draw here with Wisconsin and Iowa, obviously, but I don't think it's necessarily tougher because they get them both at home, whereas they had to play both Minnesota and Nebraska on the road last year. Yeah, Wisconsin, Iowa finished ahead of them, but this time they'll get them at home. And Northwestern, I'm not really expecting to be all that great. So, yeah, it's a tougher draw just looking at the teams, but maybe it's really not that much tougher because you get both of these games at home with Wisconsin and Iowa. So back to the schedule here. They're open up with Notre Dame, first game of the season at home. Then they'll play Arkansas State and Toledo. So the 3 non-conference games there. Right to kick off the season. Of course, last year they played Minnesota to start off the season with a Big Ten game. This year they'll have the 3 non-conference games first. But like I said, that's going to be a very tough way to start off the season with Notre Dame. Ohio State, I think, probably will be favored in that game, but it's not going to be an easy one. Then they'll wrap up the month of September with a home game against Wisconsin. Nice test there early. So you look at the month of September, you've got Notre Dame and Wisconsin, 2 very tough tests, but both at home. So I think that bodes well for the Buckeyes. Going into the month of October, they'll play Rutgers. And then a pretty tough stretch here. Michigan State on the road. They do get a bye week after that before playing Iowa and then Penn State on the road. So 3 games that'll be pretty tough there. Michigan State, Iowa, and Penn State, 2 of those games on the road. And you look at the first 8 games of the schedule, it's not all that easy. You've got Notre Dame, Wisconsin, Michigan State, Iowa, and Penn State. 5 of their first 8 games should be tests for them. So this is a pretty tough schedule for Ohio State going into the month of October, or the month of November, I should say. They'll then have a pretty easy stretch with Northwestern, Indiana, and Maryland, games where Ohio State should be a pretty big favorite. Maryland could test them a little bit on the road right before Michigan. Should have a good offense, so don't sleep on that one. That could be a pretty good matchup there. But overall, those 3 games shouldn't be that tough. And then, of course, they'll finish off with Michigan. They do get Michigan at home. So I think there's a very good chance that Ohio State could go undefeated there in the month of November. What's going to determine whether or not this team will be right there maybe in the college football playoff, it's going to be those first 8 games, it's going to be from Notre Dame all the way down to Penn State. Yes, you've got Arkansas State, Toledo, and Rutgers in there, but the other 5 games will be tough games for the Buckeyes. They'll probably be favored in every single one of these games, but just because you're favored doesn't mean you're going to win, obviously. And so there will be some opportunities for them to trip up. It all begins there with Notre Dame. If they can win that game, build some momentum. Good news is you get Wisconsin and Iowa both at home, but a couple of really tough road games there. Michigan State and Penn State in the month of October. Those games could ultimately determine whether or not Ohio State wins the Big Ten East this year, or maybe they miss out like they did last season. So, like I said, schedule in 2022 in some ways is easier when you get Michigan at home, when you get Iowa and Wisconsin at home. But I think overall, this schedule probably a little bit tougher than the one in 2021. Here were the projections from 2021 for Ohio State. Their record was 10-2. They actually finished below the projections. Our projection was 11-1, going through and doing it just like we're going to do in this video. And then our prediction was also 11-1. I did have them losing 1 game. So, 11-1, that's still a really good year. 10-2, it was a disappointment. It was a big disappointment for Ohio State. And I think a lot of the reason why the projection was so high is because Michigan and Michigan State, those 2 teams were not expected to be as good as they turned out to be. And when you looked at it in the preseason, those should have been easy wins. Now, Michigan State turned out to be an easy win, but of course, Michigan beating Ohio State was the big surprise, at least going back to the preseason. So 11-1, the projection. The FBI had them at 10.8 and 1.9. Which that does include the Big Ten championship game. So, they had them closer to 10-2 than they did 11-1 when you take out the Big Ten championship game. But then they gave them basically a 70% chance to go to the Big Ten championship. I think most people, before the season started, just expected Ohio State to be there. Of course, they didn't quite make it. But 10.8 wins, including a Big Ten championship, that does put the projection closer to 10-2. So the FBI nailed it with Ohio State last season, except for the fact that they expected them to go to the Big Ten championship. And then the over-under for them was 11. So, I think most people are probably going to stay away from that number because 12-0 was going to be hard to do with their schedule. But I don't think many people, again, expected them to go 10-2, which turned out to be their actual record. So we'll see what the projection shows for 2022. And again, there's a big difference here because of the perception of some of these teams that they're going to be playing this year. We're expecting these teams to be better than we expected them to be in the preseason last year. So keep that in mind. Here's the schedule for Ohio State. Here's how we break it down. The games that are basically 50-50 games, 40 to 60% games, they're going to stay in the white. We're not going to have any less than 20% games. Actually, we're not going to have any games in the red, orange, or yellow here. Your 61 to 70% games, those are games where Ohio State's going to be favored by about a touchdown, 6 or 7 points, somewhere in there. And then your 71 to 80% games, that is where Ohio State's probably going to be favored by double digits. And then the games in green, those are the games where Ohio State should win. They're going to be favored by 2+ touchdowns, and we count those as wins. So the green ones we count as wins, and then we average out the rest. The way we do it, 71 to 80%. So the games in blue, they're counted as 75%. The purple counted as 65%, and then the 50-50 games counted as 50%, and then we average it out. So let's start with the green games for Ohio State. I think you've got 6 of them here: Arkansas State, Toledo, Rutgers, Northwestern, Indiana, and Maryland. Pretty much a guarantee that they're going to win these 6 games. I mean, Maryland could be a little tricky on the road if they turn out to be a lot better than expected, but I think everyone pretty much guarantees that Ohio State's going to win these 6 games. Then we go to the games in blue, 71 to 80%. I've got 2 games against Western Division opponents here, Wisconsin and Iowa. I think it's hard to really see a path for either of these 2 teams winning this game. First of all, it's at home for Ohio State, and it's just the offense for Ohio State. It's going to be so explosive this year. Wisconsin, Iowa, I don't think either one of these teams have an offense that's going to be able to keep up with Ohio State. That's why I think they will be favored by double digits in both of these games, playing at home. We're going to put them in the blue here, both Wisconsin and Iowa. Then we go to the purple, the games where Ohio State is, I think, going to be favored. Again, it's maybe a 6, 7, 8 point favorite somewhere in there. And I think the rest of the schedule fits here. Notre Dame, Michigan State, Penn State, and Michigan. Notre Dame was, for me, I was very close to putting Notre Dame in the 50-50 category because it's the first game of the season. It's early on, it's a non-conference game, but home field advantage. Home field advantage is ultimately what put Ohio State into the purple in this game. If the game was on the road, this would be a 50-50 game. Even if it was a neutral site, I think this would be closer to a 50-50 game. But I think we can put that in the purple. And by the way, if we put it in the white, if we made this a 50-50 game, it wouldn't change the projection at the end of the day, so it really doesn't matter. Michigan State and Penn State, because they are on the road, I think you have to put those games in the purple. I know Ohio State absolutely destroyed Michigan State last year, but it's a new season. Michigan State expected to be a top 15 team. It's on the road. You never know. Penn State, another team that could be pretty good this year, and it's on the road. So being on the road is what we'll put those two games in the purple. Doesn't necessarily mean that I think Penn State's going to be better than Iowa or better than Wisconsin, but playing on the road makes such a big difference in college football. So I think those games are in the purple. They're closer to 70% than they are to 60%, but they are in that category in my opinion. And same thing with Michigan. Because it's at home, you really like Ohio State's chances. I know Michigan just beat them, so you would say, well, this should be closer to 50-50, but you look at what Michigan is losing, especially on defense, and the fact that this game is in Columbus, maybe I'm being disrespectful to Michigan here, but just looking at it very early, I feel like Ohio State's going to be about a touchdown favorite in this game. So when you average these numbers out, you count the green as wins. Again, you count the blue as 75%. Count the purple as 65%, and then you average those numbers out. The projection for Ohio State comes out to be 10-2. So yes, 10-2 is the projection for Ohio State. So even though they are favored in every game, and I think they're going to be about a touchdown favorite in every single game that they play, the odds would say that they're going to lose a game or two just because of these tough opponents. Notre Dame, going to be a tough game. Michigan State and Penn State on the road, they could easily slip up in one of those games. Michigan, rivalry game, they're going to be pretty good. You got Wisconsin and Iowa. Those I feel pretty confident about if I'm an Ohio State fan, but still quality teams. And when you have this many quality teams, the odds will tell you that you're going to lose a game or two, and that's what it comes out for Ohio State, 10-2. Not my prediction. I'll go ahead and tell you right now, I'm probably not going to pick this team to go 10-2. It'll probably be 11-1 or 12-0 for me. But when you average the numbers out, again, the early projection for Ohio State for 2022 is 10-2. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Give me your thoughts down in the comments below.